Hi there, I'm Sue Hitzman. Welcome to Anatomical Gangster, where I talk to brilliant people who can simplify and shed light on complicated topics to help empower people with education. A few months ago, I was listening to a podcast with one of my favorite podcasters, Duncan Trussell, and he was talking about the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis. So for me, I had to rewind the conversation and hear that term a second time. And then I looked it up and I found that the definition had to do with linguistic relativity. So if you don't know what linguistic relativity is, it's the idea that the language we speak influences how we think, perceive, and understand the world around us. It's also known as the Sapir-Whorf Hypothesis, two dudes that developed this concept. So this means that as a native speaker of English, you think differently than somebody who is a native speaker of Italian just because you speak different languages. Now, it is just a theory, but there's so many examples to support it. Things like the perception of color, or the perception of time or objects or emotion, tastes, as well as spatial orientation, number concepts, gender, language, and even memory and coding. So the question that I had was, does language shape cognition? Well, who better to talk on this topic than Sasha Chaitow? Over the last 20 years, Sasha has developed successful parallel careers in education, academic publishing, and as an independent artist, author, and public speaker, she bedazzles anybody that listens to her. She teaches research literacy and academic writing in several fields. She's also developed and delivered courses in critical thinking and inquiry, and has played various roles within academic publishing, investigative journalism, and she's published 3 books based on her research. And by the way, she's working on 5 more. So to say that Sasha is brilliant, it's really just not enough. Her artistry is complex. It brings science and philosophy and provocative energy to the viewer. So I hope that you enjoy listening to this conversation with Sasha as she shares her knowledge on this topic and so much more. And here is Sasha Chaitow. Sasha! Hello! How are you?
Good, good.
My
Sorry
God.
to reschedule.
Oh, please. I'm just so
I,
grateful that you're here and chatting with me now. And my gosh, so much has gone on since we last spoke. I mean,
lots happening. Lots
yeah.
happening.
Yet you're here, vibrant as ever.
Doing my best.
Yes, good for you. Good for you. Well, just great to see you.
You
Um,
too.
yeah, and I'm just appreciative that you're able to just kind of like talk about. I mean, actually, I have so many things I want to talk to you about, and I feel like I'm not really sure where to start, but I feel like you'll probably be good wherever we begin, and I'm sure that it'll be a little bit of a conversation. Yeah, yeah,
Probably.
yeah.
Probably.
Well, so Sasha, I mean, I discovered you because of your dad, Leon Chaitow, and I went to one of his workshops many years after I had known him. He was back in New York, and we got into the topic of art and all of the amazing artistry in New York. And he said, my daughter is an artist. Do you know what she does? And I said, no. And he showed me these incredible pieces of art that really span, I don't know, the darkest parts of psychology to the, kind of the tarot nature of spirituality and humanism of some sort. I mean, it really is so unbelievable what your artwork is. But I'm curious, because it's got to be an amazing thing. You come from a real legacy of brilliant minds. And of course, they gave birth to this incredibly brilliant being that I'm sitting here with. How has it been for you growing up in, I guess, an academic family? How did you kind of come to, because you're into both sides, the artwork and the science? I know that they merge, but like, give me a little bit of a background of like, where did it start for you?
I don't know. It's hard to answer from this end because it's just, there's never really been a division between the one thing and the other. They're all just, on a great big spectrum of, the great tapestry of life, so to speak. My dad, I don't know, he would, I've got this great memory, like from I was 8 or something, and he was, at the time, this is back in the 80s, photocopies, paper, things still on paper. He used to put out this newsletter, which I would help him put together. And this was back in the days, he was gathering little snippets of research on this and that and effectively creating his own mini journal, long before that turned into a very big journal. And I would help him put it together, piles of photocopies, staple them, put them in envelopes, what have you. And, my eye would catch this or that title or word, and I'd ask, and he would start explaining what it was. Now, to an 8-year-old, or I would be, translating for his Greek patients, because I speak both languages, and maybe we'd stop in the middle of something. He'd actually have to explain, the practicalities of the treatment he was giving for me to explain to the patient. Again, I was maybe 9 or 10 at this point, so there was that aspect of things, and then the same afternoon we might spend a couple of craft hours together. And little known fact, my dad painted. He loved painting too. It's one of the things he did to relax. I have some of his paintings, which are very precious to me. And one of our favorite pastimes was going to galleries together, going to bookshops together. So, these were all aspects of the way I grew up. And when the time came for me to choose direction, I came very, very close to following in his footsteps as a practitioner. Um, but my in my late teens at this point, I realized that I preferred the research side of things. I preferred the academic side of things. I preferred dealing with words and ideas, and I wasn't that great face to face in the kind of patient practitioner position. It's something I didn't really feel comfortable with, and to this day, I believe I made the right decision in that
Yeah,
fact.
well, and I mean, I think what I'm hearing, and this is one of these things that I don't think people really realize. And I think I kind of grew up in that same type of a family where I was always helping my mother or helping my father with their business, with their work. And they were both entrepreneurs. So the fact that I became an entrepreneur is like, I mean, it's not surprising, right? But that, right. And I don't think that people realize, with Leon's work, with the body work and movement journal, that you spent an incredible amount of time prior even to this, helping him to compile his work, edit his work, helping him organize his work, because he was one of those minds that was out there, but not really so well in business, right? I mean, that's a reality.
Well, I mean, I'll say the business head in the family was my mum. Not dad, not me. So she was really the one who helped keep him organized in terms of the actual business side, but in terms of the actual work side, I mean, he sat in this very spot. This is his office. I don't know if you're going to keep the video, but there you see those shelves. Those are still his books as he left them up there on the behind me on the right. I've kept a few corners untouched. And I would stand behind him, working on his shoulders, reading over his shoulder. And I was like, you can do better with that sentence. Like, Dad, what is that paragraph trying to say there? Come on, let's. And there were little things like that. There were times when, there's sort of the influx of articles for review simply, it was just simply too much. And I would kind of do a first, um, uh, what's the word? Yeah, like a first check on them. Um, he helped me hone my writing, but I also helped him. And as I grew older and like got a formal academic education, basically formal academic training, this was something that we would spend hours sort of discussing this and that latest hot topic, and evidence this, and
Or all of it.
translational research, especially, which was very important to him.
Well, and that
So,
was that was something, I guess it was a number of months ago. I don't know if you know who, he's a podcaster. His name is Duncan Trussell, and he, what was it called? The Midnight Gospel. It was this cartoon kind of animation, and he was in conversation. He was doing a podcast, and he had used the words Sapir-Whorf, and I was like, I rewound it. I was like, what is that thing? So then I went and I looked it up, these two scientists, and on this topic of language and being in the scientific community and listening to sometimes arguments that people have because of the words we choose, and then really pondering upon that and thinking to myself, well, we're living in a world today where we're using emojis, we're using WTF or LMAO, or right, and we're all supposed to figure out what these words mean, but it's really changed language. And when I reached out to you on Facebook, I was like, anybody know about like this kind of course it was you. I thought, of course, Sasha, of course. So I'm curious, like, could you talk a little bit about this with language? And because you're, also studied academically, and this is like so in your wheelhouse, can you kind of give a little shape and about this and what's happening to us? And I guess this century of new technology and new communication skills, or not?
or not, indeed. Yeah, it's scary how fast it's going. That's a fact. Okay, so I mean, so the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is Sapir and Whorf for two different scientists, came through linguistics and anthropology, who looked at this idea at two slightly different times and built on each other's ideas. Um, there's two versions of the theory: the strong version and the weak version. The strong version says that effectively the structure of the language we use shapes our worldview. Um, and that's not only the language that we kind of grow up using as our native language, but also how well we speak it and how extensive our knowledge and understanding of it is. However, that particular theory has been criticized because it's what, to use the jargon, it's seen as too deterministic. It's as if we don't have free will, as if we can't break out of that. So, if we grow up in a culture speaking language X, we can never break out of whatever framework that puts us in. And obviously, that's not realistic. We can educate ourselves out of it. We can think our way out of it. It takes effort, but we can. So the weaker, but it's not a great word, weaker, but the more relativist position is, and this has been demonstrated basically in anthropology and sociology in that world, that the language we use does shape our perspective on reality. In short, it shapes the reality that we recognize and we acknowledge.
Mm.
And that is something malleable, that is something fluid, and it can expand and change, especially if we expose ourselves to more ideas and more language. But the question is, of course, well, how does language do this?
Right.
Well,
How does it do it?
how does
Especially
it?
because we're not communicating sometimes. Our language, I think that there's a big change in people where we're not, like, there's words that mean so much, right? Like, I mean, there was even an HBO show where they were talking about like the word fuck, and saying, it can mean a million and one things. Oh, it'd be like, oh, well, this is fucking great. Oh, that's fucked up, right? So use like that. There are literally words in the way that we're communicating in our culture today. I think in some ways it's it's getting more confusing to communicate. I don't know if we're communicating, and really, what is reality, and do we have free will? I mean, all of these things, you go down a rabbit hole, even trying to define those concepts to be able to communicate an idea, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've had a good 20 years teaching language arts alongside a lot of the other things I do, and that doesn't mean just teaching language, as in another language, but it also means communication. It also means how to use the language you've already got, how to write better, how to write academically, how to write creatively, how public speaking. So I've taught across that spectrum, and I've taught kids, I've taught teenagers, I've taught adults, I've taught older adults. So my experience in those classrooms has shown that we can definitely, we very much do have free will, and all we really need to do is apply an inquiring mind and an open mind, and be open to the fact that we can see things in new ways. But it also needs to be presented and explained in a way that meets people where they are. So if somebody is only able to, I mean, this is something I've seen a lot with teenagers in our time, like right now. It's an example that it still gives me a headache. There was this one lovely teenage girl, must have been about what, 15, 16, and she said, um, "Oh, I feel like I'm like, could you please put that into a sentence with a beginning, middle, and ending?" She's like, "Well, I feel like, And I'm like, all right, try that again, darling. Is not a word. It took about 4 tries before she actually got it as far as, um, I'm feeling quite frustrated over such and such
Right.
situation.
Mm.
So she was actually trying to express frustration, and she knew the word for frustration, but not being able to actually reach for that word, not being used to reaching for words in spoken language at all,
Mm.
because she was too used to emojis and abbreviations.
Exactly. Yeah,
Made
it's
it
use
impossible
words
for her to express, any
in
something
words.
in words.
Mm.
And so you had this image of a kind of silent teenager with headphones communicating in grunts, because, because so much of the communication that she was now used to was through this new medium, which to you and me, perhaps, we wouldn't even understand the abbreviations. And actually, I don't understand most of the slang they use now. So
Yeah.
that makes me officially old. But
It's true. Well, and that's another thing, generation to generation. There's even words that were used so commonly in the olden days that are people say, well, you can't use those words anymore. You can't like that's offensive to people. Whereas in earlier times, there was no offense taken. It was just normal conversation.
well, again, that's an example. That's a perfect example of how language and how we perceive it then shapes our perception of reality. So, somebody may hear another person using a particular set of expressions, which are fine in their context and they're fine where they come from. But it's not received that way. I mean, communication is always, think of a radio, of how radio works. It's exactly the same. You've got a transmitter and you've got a receiver, and in between, you've got static, you've got noise. And how much of the original message, including intent, is ever received at the other end? Often enough we say, "Oh, I'm not responsible for what you understand. I'm only responsible for what I said." But in fact, sometimes I think we've got to meet halfway. We've got to account for the noise that's going to happen in the middle. We've got to account for the, I don't know, cultural differences, all the social differences, all the kinds of things that are going to go on in the middle. I mean, I've got another funny story. I don't know if it's funny or sad or what it is. I recently had to renovate my library area of the house because my roof got very damaged and I had a flood. And anyway, water damage, not nice. So, anyway, um, when I finally managed to get a contractor in to rebuild basically this part of the house, I also had myself a broken ankle. So I couldn't move 7,000 books anywhere, and I had to ask them to send a couple of workers to shift the books for me. Now, this is a library where everything had its place. I kind of like every shelf was labeled. I'm like that. There's too many books to do otherwise. Um, and I said to the very, very nice workers who came to do this, very obliging. I was like, guys, I need you. You take something off out of one shelf, it needs to go back on the same shelf or at least in the same bookcase. Because if you put it at the other end, God help me, I'm going to have to reorganize everything. Well, God bless them. They were very obliging, very pleasant, very hard workers. But when they put my books back, and I couldn't oversee this because I couldn't hobble around on crutches all the time. When they put my books back, they put them all in sideways on, so you could only see like because they thought that would economize on space. And not only that, but they also said to me, "Don't you think it's time to get rid of some of these?"
Oh,
And I'm like,
yeah.
"Eddie, what do you want them all for?"
Rid
Now,
of books. No.
bless bless them, they were workers from another country who like anyway, they didn't know which end of a book was which, basically.
Right, right.
And okay, now however that story sounds, and it's really quite amusing. Now, I could have become extremely worked up. I could have made a big fuss and bother and got them to put them back right. Or I could have laughed and done it myself, which is what I've ended up doing. But
Right.
the moral of the story was I had to explain to both them and the contractor, these are my tools. Imagine me telling you that you've got too many drills and nuts and bolts and it wasn't until
Yes.
I said that we managed to cut through the noise and the static between why the heck I was asking these guys to shift books for 2 days.
That's a great analogy of it too. You're right. Where it's it's kind of like you just don't know until you can separate it out, where you're realizing how you're saying it, these books are tools, and so having them out this way, it's like saying to somebody else, so you don't need your hammer or that drill, right? I have a spatula, I'm sure you can hammer that nail in with a spatula, but
Right.
there's no wrong tool, right? So I get that.
And that's my what I mean by meeting in the middle. You've got to meet someone where they are.
Hmm.
Um, Now the trouble with I think like the hot topics, the big debates, the why we all go at each other on social media. I don't know if there's an excuse for folks over a certain age. I really don't. I don't. I think we've become a little bit too laid back about that in some cases, or we shouldn't be having serious discussions on social media if we can't, I don't know, remember what it was like to have a polite conversation once
Well,
upon.
that's it, right? People are hiding behind keyboards also. We're living in a digital world. And I think you're right. I think meeting people halfway, I think that's a really great message. And I've seen you do this in so many ways in the work that you've done, just trying to, for you, bridging academics with the layman, right? To try to bring some of this out to the general population in your work, in your father's work. I mean, I've seen you put on 10 different hats, trying to keep things together, trying to manage expectations, right? So it really becomes a part of communication. It's an artist of communication.
It is, and I mean, I certainly don't get it all right, and I don't do it all perfectly, but it's certainly the intent. And as far as my own field is concerned, I've been doing outreach work for years where I really do not expect, when I was promoting the idea of outreach, bring academic learning to the community, bring it to the interested layperson, bring it to the general public. I remember a quite senior academic at the time saying to me, "But yes, but surely they can come and study at university if they want, to learn more." I was like, "Well, do you ask? Are you asking whether people are actually able to do that? Do they have the funds to do that? Do they have the time to do that?" It's like, "Well, they can pick up a book and read about it." And I was like, "And who's telling you that they are actually able to follow the kind of high academic language
Mhm.
used in those books?" It was like, "Well, if they're not lazy, they'll learn." And I found that so horrendously
Yes, it's
arrogant.
egoic. It's so egoic. It's
It's
rude.
crazy. I'm pleased to say
Rude.
I'm actually friends with this academic today, and he's done a full 180 on the on his perspective of several years. This like 10, 15 years ago, the conversation. But one of my, my sense always was that you can communicate complex information without dumbing down. You
Yes,
just
I think I was told long ago that if you cannot simplify the scientific information that you're learning, you don't know it well enough yourself to be teaching it.
precisely.
I said, well,
That is absolutely it.
yeah, I
That is
mean,
that.
I think that's what makes a great teacher is that you can meet people where they're at. Like you say, you have to meet them halfway. If you're speaking at this level on topics that are, all well and amazing and unbelievable, but if you're speaking it in a way where it's like, an audience leaves going, wow, she's really smart. I didn't understand anything she said, but she's really bright. You're alienating the very people you're trying to get them to take action, right? So again, language once again comes into play.
It does, but there's also another dimension, and unfortunately, we do see a lot of this. I think also in the worlds, well, you see it in the worlds of body work, but you see it everywhere, really. Which is that it's not you can alienate people, yes, but what also tends to happen is you start getting this kind of hero worship scenario, like, "Oh, I didn't understand a word he said. Isn't he brilliant?"
Mhm.
And following on from that, you get dogma. You get people just parroting whatever it is, not applying any kind of critical thought because maybe they don't know how to, because maybe that's what they really need to be learning to do. And again, that goes hand in hand with language as well, being mindful of the language you're using and of the meanings that you are both receiving and transmitting.
Yeah, well said. Well
If
said.
you are if you're not able to do that, then you're gonna jump on the next bandwagon.
Yeah, yeah, and
And
I think you're also, I mean, and you're hitting on a topic where I think of your father and this legend of osteopathy. I recall the very first time I was introduced to his work. I was 22, 23, and he was presenting with Judy Delaney, who was Judy Delaney Walker at the time, and I don't even know how I registered for this class, but I came in and I'm in the back of the room, and he starts presenting, and what he's talking about was partly over my head because I was just in a master's program. I was right in the middle of it, of exercise science, and he's sort of speaking in this way where I'm like, this is not what I've learned in physiology. This is something like, where is he getting this information from at first? And then I just remember kind of sinking in my hair, thinking to myself, I had pigtails in my hair just yesterday. I think I'm in over my head. But at the break, when I went up to him and I said to him, I think I'm a little in over my head, but you're speaking in this way that it resonates with me about vibration and frequency and tone, and the right pressure at the right angle with the right intention can change everything. You don't need to push, you don't need to be heavy handed. and it really gave me a new perspective on how to influence my physical form through touch in a very gentle approach. And I think I mean, something like 80 books. Am I right? 80 books. I
Right.
can't, I mean, and so many of them, a lot of overlapping information, bringing you back into these ideas that he had. And then, many years go by, and now he's gone. But I watched you, in some ways, have to fight for your voice, in the fact that you were, with the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies, you were a managing editor. You were behind the scenes. I don't know how, I had no idea how much of an influence you had in the work, because I didn't know enough about you. And then watching this divide of people wanting power, wanting tout, whatever, and then trying to uphold his work while also doing your own. As I mean, your father dies, there's all of this emotion, you've got your own work, your own career, plus the managing editor, plus working with so much of your father's work. How were you able to keep all of the pieces together in that time of almost looking like war, with maintaining the journal?
I'm really not sure, but I think it's called loyalty.
Mm.
Um, my father, especially the older he got, I mean, he kind of said, Sasha, sod it all. I've given enough. You do you, basically.
Mm.
Um, but I could not just sit by and watch everything he'd worked for become pickings for vultures.
Yes.
And
And I saw it happen.
yeah, yeah, we've seen it happen
Yeah.
in in some cases, not in all. On the other hand, on the other hand, what matters most, and I think as it's now been 5 years, we're getting on for our 6th year without him. It'll be 6 years in September, which is kind of hard to believe.
It is.
Yeah. Um, and I've been through the mill a bit more since, because we had round two with my mum,
Right, your mom, right.
just quite recently. But the thing is, what mattered to me was what mattered to him, and what mattered to him was helping people.
Yeah.
And by that I mean helping patients, and I also mean supporting brilliant minds and brilliant practitioners, such as yourself. Uh,
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
that he always spoke very highly of you.
Thank you.
So all the rest of it, all the rest of it, more power to them, frankly, because Leon's touch and Leon's kindness and Leon's brilliance and Leon's temper and Leon's slip ups.
Stubbornness.
Yeah, stubbornness, which thank God I've inherited. You know, um, sing on with or without me.
Yeah.
And it took a little while, to accept that. But the fact is, I'm very proud of that too. And the lives he touched, and whether it's directly or indirectly through the hands of practitioners he trained, worked with, influenced, who never met him but read a book, or people who picked up one of his self-help books because he
Mhm.
wasn't above that. He didn't care about the glamour one bit. I mean, it
Right.
embarrassed
He was
it
just a
embarrassed.
really he was an earth-based human. I mean, he was grounded, he was a listener, and he really was very giving. He was just always a very giving person, I think, with all of his knowledge. I mean, really, yeah, kind of incredible. Yeah.
So I think the really those who have sought, there have been people who've sought to say, oh, I trained with Leon Chaitow and I'm continuing his work. Well, more power to them as well. The fact is, the truth is out there. There are only a couple of schools which are
Yeah.
you know, because
Really doing it.
well, who are really doing it because they're the people who spend hundreds and hundreds of hours training with him.
Yeah.
Um, and and I know who they are. And that's it. And as for the rest of it, well, frankly, I'm quite happy to have my life back.
Well, and so I mean, again, I'm curious, like, how do your own studies, because again, your academic career is not in body work, but how does it relate to body work? Like, how do you make the leap between the two? Because you do.
Well, okay, so formal academic training, right? Formal academic training. So anybody with a PhD basically
Mhm.
can tell you that when you learn to do research and when you learn to appraise research, it doesn't really matter what it's in because it's a set of skills that has to do with being able to evaluate, understand, juggle, and pass a heck of a lot of literature. I don't mean fiction. No, I mean bibliography. Okay, these are learned skills, and anyone can learn them. But once you do learn them and apply them, it doesn't matter what you're applying them to. You need a familiarity with the particular topic area, but again, that is something learnable.
Mhm.
Okay, so I would struggle at this stage probably to reinvent and apply the ability to handle research to, let's say, astrophysics, okay, because I've never touched a single piece of research on astrophysics. But growing up with Leon and watching Leon do this work with the research, and he did not have the formal training that I do, but then I get that formal training and apply it effectively to the history of ideas, history of culture, which is my particular area. But within that area, I've looked at the history of science, sorry, not silence. I've looked at the sociology of medicine. I've looked at the anthropology of medicine. So, I've looked at areas like that. And at the same time, from probably 2008 onwards, yeah, thereabouts, I think, I became my dad's silent secretary. So the information was passing my screen on a daily basis. Sometimes I created his database for him. I built his file system for him.
Yeah. Is that how you wound up teaching in the physiotherapy department?
To an extent, yeah. That was a combination of things. Like what qualified me effectively for that was I was a faculty trainer before that. But I was training faculty from across disciplines, and I was training them in critical thinking for the classroom, any classroom. Okay,
Yeah.
I can teach doctors, medical educators how to integrate that in their curriculum. I can teach secondary maths teachers how to integrate it into their curriculum. It's not. It isn't something. It's a higher thinking skill that has nothing to do with a particular discipline. So effectively, I became my dad's personal clinical librarian.
But
Um,
even but with you, I mean, because I think of you um, as also like with your PhD, is it? I feel like there's humanities, right? Like this is more in line with your study. Am I right to say that?
yeah, well, my PhD is interdisciplinary. It kind of straddles history of culture and a bit of history of science as well, because it's
Mm.
also the ideas that feed into the early glimmerings of what was once called alternative medicine, holistic medicine, and all of that. It's the same package of ideas. But my speciality is unpicking how and tracing how these ideas impacted each other, impacted culture, developed through different time periods.
Yeah.
So history of holism basically, is one part of it, and it's one area in which I did some postdoctoral work.
Do
And
you, do
so
you do you think that I mean, it strikes me here, like with the way that well, I mean, you're not living in the United States, but the U.S. culture seems when I have traveled abroad, some people are almost enamored. There was a time of enamorment of the United States. Like if I had a T-shirt that said New York City, I remember being in London and somebody saying, "I'll give you $50 for that shirt," and I'm like, "For my T-shirt?" They're like, "That's so awesome!" And I just think, where's the culture today? Do you think? I mean, has it? Do you feel like there's been a significant change because of technology linking countries, because we have the internet, or does it all seem like we're still so divided? We still are not communicating. We still have so much separation. Uh, have things changed in the mindset of, I guess, humanity?
Um, it's hard to say. I mean, we've got this whole new frontier created by the internet where we can connect, yes, across culture and across time, but well, not across time, but across cultures. But I don't know, and in some cases it can be very profound. In some cases, it's totally superficial. I think it's too early to say,
Mm.
quite frankly. There is some flattening of culture, but I don't know how deep that is. I know that there are still centers, absolutely buzzing centers of culture, but I still think that the real stuff is happening on the ground. I think of I don't know, Athens, Greece, which, yes, we associate it. I think most people associate it with antiquity and the ancient Greeks and the glory that was Greece and blah 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 blah. But that's actually quite sad in the sense that it's also an absolutely buzzing hotspot for street art, and artists from across the world will gather there
Mhm.
annually, and they have sort of great big festivals, and it really is a creative hub as well.
Mhm.
And the same thing is happening in other capitals, and there is real community and real exchange that's happening from city to city. And Athens is just one hotspot that I've noticed recently is on the rise, as it were.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, the same can be said in many, many fields. I wish there was more, back to the physiotherapy department that I'm very excited really to be teaching for, because the course that I'm running for them, it's one of the only ones of its kind in the country, where we're actually training students in research appraisal and manuscript development.
Mhm.
So we're giving them the tools to engage in research from within their
So
clinic.
important. It's so
Uh,
important to be able to. I mean, I think that and this was something that I learned when I first approached Tom Finley. I wanted to do a research study on low back pain, making all the success, and being able to construct the parameters of the study in such a way that you could present it to the board to have it reviewed, right? That internal review board, and uh, every sentence was critical. It wasn't. There's no fluff, you know. I mean, it really. I think that's probably where a lot of clinicians will never be able to rise up with their clinical research because of being able to write, to be able to publish the theories, to be able to put it out there, right? I mean, that's so important.
well, I mean, this again is what's so, well, from where I'm sitting, frustrating. These are learnable skills. The thing is getting across that they matter as much, if not more, than picking up yet another modality in a weekend. Yeah, best not do it in a weekend, do it in 2 or 3, which is still too rushed, but that's how we do it.
Mhm.
Um, but then there's feedback and all the rest of it. But these are learnable skills, and the way this course came about was contacts that I had with some of the professors in the, well, head of department really, saying how amazing it would be. They do so much research, and they have so much output as a department. And I said, you have got to get these kids on the global stage. They're doing absolutely incredible work, but nobody can read it. It's in Greek, for goodness sake.
Ha.
And I'm like, let's bring this to the table and let's help them go to the next level, because what you've got is research into manual therapy. Manual therapy, incidentally, is taught as it's built into the basic physiotherapy training here, which I know for the United States, it's like, what? And if
Yeah.
you tell whenever I tell them the sort of hot topics internationally, and the fact that manual therapy has come in for quite a lot of flack in recent years, they look at it like, what are you talking about? But why? I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that's a long story.
Yeah.
And it's something that where I actively encourage them to look at these difficult topics and address them.
Hmm.
It's like every little pebble that you can add to the discussion, is it can catapult your careers from within your own little practices
That's it.
somewhere, you
That's
know.
it.
Mm. So I mean, it's something that I enjoy doing. It's amazing to see people inspired and realizing that they can contribute and make a difference. And it's something that I would love to be able to see happening more widely, really.
I mean, it really is. I think it's really important, and I think, yeah, I just think to myself, if I were in high school today, I don't know if I would survive. The amount of, it seems like more pressure. I remember being able to come home from school and finish my homework and then go out and play until dinner time for 2 hours. And I've got friends who have kids who don't see the light of day and are sitting in a chair from 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock at night. And then their extracurricular activities are studying or school or books. And there's I think a human movement crisis that is happening in today's day and age that is keeping us very tied to this little thing, and they're always, again, communicating through emojis, through texting, uh, and really not using words. They're not truly communicating with their voice. It's kind of, we're in a paradigm where even I'll call a friend and be like, okay, I'm so 1980s. I just picked up the phone to say I love you. They're like, oh, I got a real phone call. I can't remember the last time that somebody's calling me without an appointment or without it being on my schedule, right? So I think there's a point of language of being able to present words verbally that is being lost somewhere in our culture, because we're just not using language as in my mind, like we should, right? I think there's something missing.
Well, there's a question of whether this is a generational shift and where this is going there, because there's been some recent studies of younger generations that have grown up only using technology. I mean,
Mhm.
unlike ourselves, because we picked it up somewhere in our early adulthood, and we're the last generation to have done that,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah, we
quite
were the
tragic.
first kids on the block to have a computer, and I think I was maybe 13, and that was our first computer, right? So what is that? That's like 1983 or something like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, my dad made sure I was introduced to computers like pretty early on. It was around that time,
Sure.
um, but it was never a necessity. It was just kind of nice to have.
Hmm.
Uh,
Exactly.
and I didn't get a mobile phone until I was 21.
Oh yeah.
They were there. I didn't want one. Couldn't see the point. But with what there's been studies, you see, about attention spans among not just teenagers, but also I guess what they'd call Gen Z today.
Mhm.
Um, and the fact that they're no longer writing by hand but typing. So there's been some studies, and there's with some neurological, uh, neuroscientific um, uh, evaluations as well. And what they discovered is that yes, and their attention spans are indeed shorter. Different parts of the brain are fire. It is different parts of the brain are firing up, and they're firing up in totally different ways to the way your and my mind works. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the result is less effective. It's
Right.
just a totally
Different.
different route to get there. And that is one of the reasons that communication breakdown is happening, because that we're communicating along completely different pathways, speaking generationally again. Um, and also, this is something that I encountered in my last year teaching teenagers, which was during the pandemic. I was teaching online, well, as were we all, I think. But I was teaching. I had one class of teenagers that I was training them for TED to do TED talks. On the one hand, and that went well for them. For me, it was a struggle to be that get trying to get ideas into these bite-size clips without using language the way I'm used to. For
Mm.
me, was a real struggle. But the point was to help them to be able to articulate ideas and have a beginning, middle, and ending. And so, in that sense, it was successful. And the second class I taught, which was, well, that was a learning experience for me again. And this is where I said I don't think I'm going to go back to teaching teens at this point, because the communication gap is just too large now. Was literature. And the struggle I had, and what I saw with great sadness, was that they had a book to read. Okay, they had a or we had there was a book that we had to study together and work on together in literature analysis, as one does. And they could not focus for long enough. They could not see the point of
Yeah.
so many words on a page.
Yes, I literally people aren't reading anymore. When I say, "Oh yeah, no, I have a book on this," they're like, is there an Audible or
Yeah.
something or, an abridged this or that?" And I'm like, "It's not a very big book. It's like 400 pages. You'd be done in maybe a weekend. It's not that much." And they're like, yeah, no." And I'm wondering, is it that they can't read? No, it's that their mind can't stay focused long enough to get through a paragraph before they're a part of their brain, I think, is wandering away while they're reading. So that has got to be because, and this is my, again, a theory. I have not done research on this, but that the neural circuits, the actual correlates of the mind, are being wired and firing in a different way than the way that we were taught to learn. I just we were so forced into reading. We read books, and then at the end of the week we had a test on said book, right? So you would sit down and read the whole book. They're not reading a
There were
book.
those, yeah, but there were those who never picked up a book again after they were no longer obliged to, and there were
Yeah,
those who
true.
went on to read for the rest of their lives for enjoyment. But the thing is, you're absolutely right. It is that the wiring has changed. And this same study that found that teens are communicating and even thinking in totally different ways now.
Yeah.
And that's a reflection of the changed way of communication, that even the same thing is happening to adults, because of course the brain is malleable, the brain is plastic. So the more we engage with technology and the snappy bite-sized videos, come on, give it to me in a 3-minute clip. I mean, it's something that I look at. I can see there's a demand, and my brain cannot. Cannot do it.
That's it.
I have no idea how to
Yeah.
get into a 3-minute clip.
It's so yeah, I mean, I think that's it. The kids, like, if we have a 65-year-old English teacher who's teaching 14-year-olds whose brains are wired differently, that teacher's got to be so frustrated, right? Because that teaching style it's not something wrong with the kids. It may be something wrong with the way that we're teaching. And adults need to come up to a new way of teaching minds that are learning differently. It's not that they can't learn. There's so many people diagnosed ADD, ADHD. And I think to myself, is it that they have attention deficit disorder, or it's the way that we're teaching them? They can't, their brain, those correlates don't link up the same way, right?
They don't. I mean, I was trying to teach poetry, and of course, the first thing is, what the heck's the point of poetry? And it's a legitimate question from a 14-year-old, and it's a legitimate question from any scientist, whether,
Sure.
medic or body worker. And my response there would be that learning to understand the point of poetry teaches you to listen to people.
Well
Because
said.
when somebody walks into a clinic and isn't able to express themselves very well for whatever reason, you've got to pick up on the clues they give you and pass those into a picture. And the same thing happens when you read a good poem.
Well
So
said.
anyway, in parenthesis there, what's the point of the humanities? How it relates.
Yes.
But, what I ended up doing, and I enjoyed this so much, this was one of my success stories. What I ended up doing in that class was, I gave them performance poetry, I gave them rap, and
Brilliant.
then I had them writing. I had them writing it. I had them. I played them poetry slams. I played them, performance poetry, and in a heartbeat, they're like, "But Miss, this isn't poetry." I'm like, "Isn't it?"
This is, yes, it is.
And
Right. Yes,
it
of course it
turned
is.
but then I gave them William Blake, 17th century
Right.
British poetry dressed up the same way, and they went into total shock after, because I didn't tell them until the end what they'd actually been reading. And they're
Brilliant.
like, and so there are ways in. There are absolutely, with the kids, there are ways in.
Mhm.
Yeah, you've got to meet them where they are. And I
I'm
had
curious. I know you have some books that are published, but there's some that are in progress. What do you have in the works?
oh, so what have I got? Okay, so I'm I'm editing. Basically, I'm not overseeing, I'm doing it. I'm actually doing the revisions of my dad's books that are coming up, that have come up for revision. So I'm contracted as series editor for his textbooks with Elsevier. So we've last year we published Sandy Fritz over took on the clinical editing of the book, and I took on sort of the whole overview. The muscle energy techniques book, and now we're working with a great team of editors on his breathing book, breathing pattern disorders,
One of my favorites.
which is a big one. Yeah, lots of lots of input, very big team. So that's underway right now. Um, and I've also contributed to a university textbook here in Greece, which is used across physiotherapy departments. So I've contributed several chapters there, reflecting the techniques that my dad taught on and used,
Amazing.
using his teaching material, like from the last classes he taught. And then, well, in my with my other hat on, I published two studies, one on the history of alchemy and art, how the early stirrings of what became chemistry, the art inspired by
Mm.
that particular. You see, once upon a time, these things were not separate,
Yeah.
because images and very elaborate symbolic images were used to teach um, the inner workings of nature. So you see, these things aren't really, or didn't used to be, separate, and that's why it's an area that fascinates me, because I love thinking in
I, I
images.
I see alchemy in your artwork.
Well, it's an area that I've studied, I think, more of the
Yeah.
history of alchemy, more than any, almost more than any other.
Mhm.
Simply because the imagery fascinated me, and then I wanted to understand the history, and then I wanted to understand the impact of that history,
Mhm.
and somehow I ended up finding out that the undercurrents, the philosophical undercurrents, ended up in, well, holistic medicine, really.
Yeah.
uh, and that it's not all about turning lead into gold. Okay, that's unfortunately the kind of pop impression that's, yeah, been left. There's a whole story to it. So I've written a book on that. I've written a book on the history of this very weird French author who thought that the world could he could spark a revolution through art again,
Mhm.
90, and whose brother was a very peculiar but influential homeopath in 19th century France. So that was the topic of, yeah, my last book, and now I'm working on several edited translations of some ancient manuscripts.
So you
Because
like have all this free time on your hands,
Oh yes, don't I? And in the middle of this, my roof collapses and my library floods, and I've had to be away from my desk until like this week, basically.
Unbelievable.
Uh, well, and yeah, these it's a project based approach. So do a little bit of one, do a little bit of the other, come back to the one, come back to the other. So yeah, I've got 5 books underway at the moment.
Oh my gosh. I mean, unbelievable. Honestly, Sasha, it's just, you are kind of an enigma in your own right. And I think I just remember like that last real sit down that I had with your father. And I think one of the things that really I so wished I had with my father was he had such admiration for you and so much love for you, just how, I don't know, just like what a light you were for him. And so I think that that's just so wonderful that in some ways you help to keep his legacy alive, but also, your bright light is just, you just kind of sprinkle your fairy dust over so many different, I guess, things in the world. It's
I try
unbelievable.
to do things that I find meaningful. So
Unbelievable.
yeah, and they may look disparate, they may look disconnected, but they really
They
are not.
don't. But that's it. They don't. It's actually, I can see how you can find the link between them now. It really makes sense because you do, like, from the arts to the sciences, humanity, alchemy. It's all just an art of communication and bringing
And in the history,
awareness.
there are
History.
the way the threads of history are connected. So I focus on a little piece of the tapestry, and then another little piece of the tapestry, and onward it goes.
So I ask the last question to everybody that does the anatomical gangster conversations with me, and so I'm going to ask you the same question. I love hearing what everybody says. So the question is, oh wait a minute, I hear Scott is drilling away back there. Hang on a minute, I'm going to edit this part out. He's so obnoxious. I'm renovating my house. I tell him between 4:30 and 5:30 nothing. Yet he is drilling. Hang on.
It's 5:30 sharp. That's why.
Indeed. Oh, exactly. We're a minute over. Okay, so here, so the question is, if if you could tell somebody something that you know that most people probably know nothing about, but if they did, it might actually change their traditional school of thought, and it might even change the way that they conduct their life in the future. What would it be?
Life is very short, and you only get to live it once, because that's the hardest lesson that I've been having to learn this
Yeah.
year. And
That's
yeah,
it. That is a fact. I mean, life is short. It's such a blessing to be in skin. So I say the same thing. If ever you think you're having a bad day or you can't take another step or you don't want to go any further, right? It's like, you know what? It's a blessing that the human experience is short. It's fleeting, and it's just there for spiritual enlightenment somewhere along the line.
Or maybe just for having, quiet, carefree,
Mhm.
happy days, and maybe no more than that. It doesn't have to be more than that,
Yeah, that's it.
um, at the end of the day. But, if I think sometimes we kind of set it's our own expectations, isn't it? We kind of set ourselves up for disappointment, but it's relearning to see the beauty in the everyday and in the little things. I think that's
Well said.
the
Well
most
said.
important.
Well, Sasha, I mean, as always, I'm just such a fan, and I can't wait to see how much more you do and to continue to follow your artwork. So, thank you again for doing this with me. For those of you guys who are watching, if you've enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you subscribe to the page and go find Sasha. Sasha, how can people find you? What's the easiest way to find your work?
So it's sashachaitow.co.uk, which is my main website. I think that's my main website really, which I update frequently. And on Facebook, I have artist and author page. I mean, people can send me a friend request, but I mostly only post pictures of my cats and
And
rant
they are
about,
lovely cats.
and they are. But to actually follow my work, those are my two kind of professional outlets at the moment, and which I update now and then. But that's about it. I don't do TikTok. I don't do X, formerly Twitter. I don't do
Yeah,
anything else.
no, nor should we. Well, again, Sasha, thanks again for doing this with me. And yeah, I just look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank
Will
you.
do. Thank you too. So you take care.
Thank you. Perfect. Lovely. I love that. Thank you so much for doing this. I think that's a really wonderful talk. And it is just so amazing to listen to you, just even in, I mean, your touch points are just all over the map, I mean, so many different things, teaching and writing and editing. And, I mean, it just is like you're like an octopus with your tentacles all over the place. It's really freaking tremendous.
I want to narrow, just whittle it down to writing and painting, to be honest.
Yeah.
But because I kind of need the income, but yeah. I meant what I said about life's too short.
Amen. It is. I mean, I'm with you on that. I mean, it just it goes by in a blip, and now that you've Leon and now your mom. I mean, my mom's 83, and I moved her down here to Florida after I moved down because I'm like, listen, you're not going to be here all that much longer, and I just it's hard for her. I think when you're 80, it's like you don't feel like you're at the end of your health or lifespan until you get sick or something happens. And so it really is this kind of a mind fuck that we, like age in our physical form more than our minds, hopefully, right? But watching what you went through with your mom, my mom's got bipolar disorder. Watching this is like, maddening sometimes where you're like, what in the fuck are you doing, right? But
Yeah.
so hard when the
Well,
mind goes.
I know. I've seen some of your posts. I know it takes amazing strength. I mean,
It's
I hope
crazy.
you've got support and the support system
Yeah.
there for
Yeah.
yourself as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I'm very grateful that I do have such a great support network. Otherwise, I might have lost my mind already. But yeah, I mean, to watch what you did for your mom, I mean, it's really where you just kind of stay with it until the bitter end, and that's what you do.
There's nothing you can do. What are you
No,
going to do?
exactly. That's
Well,
it.
I mean, what was I going to do? Let her just have a fall one day, and I mean, it was hell, Sue. It was hell, and it will take a long, long time to really come out the other side. But for
Yeah.
now, it's just, what, one day at a time. I'm missing
Right.
deadlines left and right. Please edit this out.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. Actually, we're done. Sorry, I didn't have. I like sometimes I just don't even